Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Between Two Nerds discussion. I'm Tom Uren, and hello, Grugq.
Hello, Tom. How are you doing?
I'm good. This week's edition is brought to you by Kroll. I have an interview with Ed Curry of Kroll about geolocation hacks and why hacked geolocation data is worrying. So this week, Grugq, we thought we'd talk about this funny phenomena where people think that the NSA or the US is the best at cyber.
Well,
and
if
we
you
were
look
laughing.
at all the rankings which are produced by the US, they always come out on top. So, I mean, case closed, right? That's
So there's that, and there's also that there's actually very little evidence in terms of the hacking that the US, the visible hacking that the US does to indicate that they would be number one.
They're like one of those martial arts experts who are like, if I actually fought, I would kill people. Trust me, I have I have the best kung fu, the best technique. You know, I use my mind to destroy it.
So we thought we'd tackle this as, do you think they are the best? And then why do other people think that? And why do we think that, if we do?
Right.
So, are they the best?
So I don't believe that you can do cyber power rankings in a purely number one, number two, number three. I don't think they rank quite like that. I think that there's probably more clusters of skill levels and capabilities that you can sort of, they're absolutely, Premier League, top of the league tables. Are they the absolute best? Maybe, but
so we've talked a couple of times about the way that think tanks will produce these kinds of reports. And the one I was involved in, the very short summary is that we looked at a whole lot of different factors. And it was the size of organizations, the legislation, the doctrine that had been published. And when you looked at it in those measures, the US came out on top. It wasn't, the one I was involved in wasn't strictly a cyber power. But the process is the same. You have some sort of measures and you try and rank them.
You have a methodology and a metric.
Partly because the US is a bit more transparent than a lot of other countries. Some of the things like published doctrine. North Korea doesn't publish doctrine. China doesn't publish doctrine. Russia, I don't know, maybe they do a little bit, but the US does.
They publish it, but they don't read it, so it doesn't matter.
And so when you've got that as a metric that's sort of artificially boosts the US based on something kind of irrelevant.
I think the methodology is going to skew the results in that you have to pick something that you can actually measure. And when you're dealing with secret agencies doing secret squirrel stuff, you're looking for proxies, right? Like proxies you can measure because you don't have anything else. And so it's always going to be imperfect in some sense.
But so what's your internal methodology? What's your biased way of coming to that conclusion?
Vibes. No, I think the fact that we don't see evidence of their operations it's a little bit like, one of those pictures of, there are 47 ninjas in this photo. Right. And I mean, they sort of actually are, is what it gets down to. It's like they just. So I think that they've been doing it for a long, long time. I think that everyone I've met that has come out of there has been competent to. I haven't met people who I've got Jesus, how did he get a job?
Right. This person is full of rubbish. They're making stuff up.
Nothing like that. They've all seemed, even if they aren't the absolute brightest spark I've ever met, none of them are dim, right? So they've all struck me as competent, and knowing that there's just thousands of them makes me feel like if we were just ranking by number of competent people working on a thing, I think they would come out on top just on that alone. And I think that does. So the numbers roughly. 30,000 at NSA. I think at last I checked it was 6,000 at Cyber Command. So that's that's a lot of people.
Now, I was wondering if the Snowden leaks, and before that there was material leaked, I think they called it Echelon at the time, about Five Eyes collection apparatus, also goes into that, in that there have been a couple of times where
the curtain was pulled back, basically.
Some of the material leaked was being received as pretty sensational.
So I think part of it is that the PowerPoint presentations that were leaked were they're your typical business PowerPoint presentation. It's casting the absolute best possible light on what you're doing, right? It's maybe a little bit stretching of the truth, maybe a little bit, excessive, but it's like these were not the sort of like cold, harsh, self-reflection, introspective, like what are our limitations? What do we for? Like it wasn't that sort of thing. It was very much here's how my team has been, exceeding expectations for this quarter, and blah blah blah. So I think that helped to a degree. Not to downplay the reality, but I think the fact that there was none of that content was like, here are the limitations that we butt up against. Here are the things that we, where we're operating at the edge of our capability, and it's, we can't push the envelope anymore. We've just sort of hit a wall.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm hearing you say is that there is kind of a long-lasting halo effect from the Snowden leaks that give everyone the impression that they can do amazing things. That is partly based on the over-enthusiastic PowerPoint work, but still, it's enough to give credibility to the organization. And those leaks are what? Are they
10
almost
years,
9 years old?
Something?
10?
No,
quite old.
No,
now.
Overtell. Yeah, they're over 10 years old, and it was like 2012. It's getting on to 15 years soon.
Yeah, and I think those types of leaks. So the Echelon ones, I remember at the time, launched a slew of news stories about OMG, NSA can spy anywhere on the planet and do anything.
Right.
And I think Snowden leaks did the same.
There's been a commercial interest in keeping up that, I'm going to call it a mythology, but that's not...
Right, yeah.
It's not a myth exactly, but it's, keeping that mystique, that aura of like, NSA is out to get you with their super awesome, amazing stuff all over the place, all the time, everywhere. Buy our product to, get our VPN to protect yourself from NSA. Like, it's been reinforced in the public,
Yeah, so that's a bit different from the kind of think tank metrics type thing. Now, of course, you and I, we're sober individuals, and we just dissect
I'll
those.
drink to that.
We dissect those links with a critical eye. So why do you think that they're like, if not the best, at least a top tier actor? I think with those, to paraphrase what you said earlier.
I think they've got more resources available, and they have for decades. That's the sort of thing that just compounds. It's very much a sort of compound interest sort of thing. Like if you bank in early and you just start getting those returns on investment early on, the fact that you started 10 years before other people is going to have a big payout just by nature of how the whole thing works. And I think if you've got smart people, then you can do smart things, which they have.
Those organizations, and when I say those organizations, I kind of mean the Five Eyes ones. They all date back to basically World War II. And so they're forged in this time where, like, getting intelligence and signals intelligence is extremely important. Very, very important. Right. And so they've been doing it ever since then. And for a lot of that time, even though there maybe wasn't, like there was a Cold War, but the whole process of collecting and disseminating intelligence has been worked out for like 80 years or something like that now.
Yeah, very much. So there's that, and then there's also the when I talk to people sort of just in general about NSA stuff, the impression I get is always extremely competent and doing maybe not the most interesting stuff, because some of it's just routine hacking that they have to do. But it does seem like interesting work. Like they have challenging things to work at, and they've just struck me as competent, and a well-resourced large supply of competent people doing stuff for 30 years, 40 years, 50.
I think one of the advantages those intelligence agencies have is it's very easy to tell if you're getting intelligence or you're not. And so if you're not getting it, that means you need to do something else. Like I think there's a lot of government departments where you're dealing with really complicated policy things where you might have an opinion on what's best, but it's very hard to tell because the timelines are so long, or because they're complex social issues. Are we winning or losing? I don't know.
Yeah, investing in infrastructure is the sort of thing that pays off in 25 years or not at all, right?
Yeah, and it's very hard to tell what the counter argument would have been, or the counterfactual. Whereas, you've got an intelligence requirement, I'm meeting it. Yay.
Right. Like we're reading their emails or we're not reading their emails.
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
Very simple metric.
And it forces you to adapt if you're not doing well. So I think that leads to competence, because you can measure it well, you can refine things. People talk about the Sigint cycle, which is a bit of a fantasy in terms of an idealized view, but it I think that's one of the reasons why you can iterate and get better.
Yeah, this is something we've talked about before, I think, is that it's very similar to offensive cyber in that, your exploit works or it doesn't work. You get that very rapid feedback. There's a sort of, it's a tactical problem, right? Like it's something that you address right now, and it proves itself or it doesn't. And you can iterate very, very rapidly just because you have that fast feedback. And, I think that when you're combining intelligence and offensive cyber, that's sort of like the best of both worlds in terms of being able to get rapid feedback and adjusting to the environment in which you operate to make sure that you're actually doing what you think you're doing, right? Like you will see that it's not working and you have to fix it, because that's just what you do as an organism. As an agency, you need to do this thing to stay alive. Otherwise, you will lose your funding because you're useless. Yeah. So I'm kind of hearing two different things from you. One of them is, part of it is stuff you've heard, like the Snowden leaks. Part of it is the vibe the people you've met who have worked there give off, just of competence, and that there's a lot of them, so that kind of is consistent. One can extrapolate.
And then there's also what we've just talked about is
structural
like
factors,
a logic for why they would be good, rather than a sort of observable. It's a kind of in your head kind of thing.
So I'd say I'd compare it to like the German military in a way, where like you can just, with the German military, you can pour resources in, but they're set up in such a bad way that it doesn't result in them having a competent military.
Why is that?
Well, if you don't use your military and you don't have a clear, a clear enemy or a clear idea of what you need to do with your military, you can spend 3 years deciding on whether you want to like buy the gold-plated tank or the platinum plated tank, and that's sort of how they squander their time, their money. They just got bureaucracy, and it's
that sounds just like the Australian Defence Force.
Yeah, and I'd say I think the difference there is that if you're looking, so like the French sort of know what they want. They want this expeditionary force that they can send to Africa and sort of keep their finger in their post-colonial non-empire, right? Like they know what they need it for. They know what they want to do. So when they're spending money, it's very focused. Like, we need a thing that will do this for us. We need forces that can do this specific thing, so that they know what they're looking for, and it's much easier for them to focus. And I think in the US, you sort of have this like, you rock up and you say like, we want tanks and jets and rockets and cannons, and the vendor says how many, and they just go yes. And so I think that's sort of the other side. Is like, maybe if you do have more money than God, it does work out.
And so this is another sort of appeal to logic, that they've just got more resources. There's that story that NSA used to hire more mathematicians than anywhere else in the world, or something like that.
Right.
I can't remember what the exact story was, but the point was that they were getting up all the talent. I don't think that's true anymore because of the rise of tech giants.
Yeah,
but
quants and AI and all this other stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you graduated with a theoretical math degree in like 97, I don't think there were a lot of options for you. For your PhD was sort of quite limited in what you can do.
So speaking of other evidence, there's occasionally you'll hear stories that the state of the art at NSA or at the Five Eyes was years ahead of the outside world. So the example I'm thinking of here is both Diffie-Hellman and RSA, which are public key cryptography. And it turns out that GCHQ, they were discovered, I think, 3 or 4 years ahead of the public discovery. If I remember, one of the GCHQ stories is that they had this theoretical problem and they gave it to an intern and he solved it in the first afternoon. It was like, oh yeah, that was a really interesting problem. I guess they just give it to interns to see if you can figure it out. And so,
here's some busy work. Work on this just to sort of whet your appetite, get into the feel of things.
And so, I guess if you've got a particular interest that's relevant to cyber, or back in those days, signals intelligence, it's you've got this whole pool of people who are possibly years ahead of the public knowledge, and they're also incorporating the best people they can find and adding to that. So there's, I don't know whether that is accumulative and gets you more and more advantage over time, or whether that erodes over time. I would guess that in the last 15 years it's eroded because of the rise of competitive, other places for those people to go.
Right. So like we've done, I think we've done everything, right? We've done evidence by deduction, which is, based on based on facts that we know about how the world works. Like if you have smart people, smart stuff happens. We've done evidence by induction, which is things that we can observe. So we've seen some of the stuff like Snowden and so on, and like if they're producing this, they must have smart people doing it. And we've done evidence by abduction, like something has to explain what's going on. Like the most likely explanation is that they're very competent and they have good people. Like they just, they must be good at what they do. Right? Which I think shows up in one of the other ways, in that it's the, barring some very famous exceptions, when there are like intelligence comes out saying something from the US, like the Russians are going to invade, or, these, when they come out and they make statements, they're quite good at what they do. Like it doesn't feel like a 50-50 coin flip that they...
Like, I think a lot of people would actually disagree with you, wouldn't they? Based on, and this is a question, based on things like Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction.
See, I think that,
and I think people remember the massive mistakes.
So I don't think that was a mistake. So like 9/11, I'd say, counts as a mistake, but it's irrelevant for what we were talking about because it wasn't a cyber collection issue. And I think that the Iraq thing was a political, they knew what they were going to do and they set out to find evidence to support it.
Right.
And I think that it's unfair to say that the intelligence services are incompetent because when they found what they were told to look for, no matter how thin, like it turned out to be bunk. But I would say also within the context of this discussion, that's sort of pre-cyber as well, right? Like that was just pure SIGINT, pure HUMINT, pure, MASINT and IMINT and stuff like that. It didn't have that massive cyber quality that you have in the last decade or so. Look, if you're looking at only the cases that I cherry pick, they have a very, very good success rate, which look, we're just going to know true Scotsman this thing until I'm right. but yeah, very much so. I do think that there's a good track record in recent years of what they've done. And I think that we also see stuff like when, it'll leak that the Israelis did some like amazing operation, and the US will be disparaging about it in a way, like, oh, congratulations on, SIGINT's my first hotel TV penetration, golf clap, yeah, exactly. Like, call me when you're like hacking light bulbs and having them, convert vibrations into audio signals that you can pick up. That'll, it's
that's funny. But like, where do you hear that? It's
obviously from the people I talk to. When I talk to like Americans, and they're like, yeah. Right. I thought I thought everyone spoke to people who said this sort of thing. Like,
right. So that's, again, evidence that what NSA does is above stuff that other people think is amazing.
Right. And it's
based on
at least
anecdotal.
They believe that what they do is superior, right? And so, there's Stuxnet, which everyone is super impressed by, which
Americans are always very careful to say, well, I don't know who did that.
Yeah. Whoever it was an absolute genius. Probably handsome as well. Very tall. Right. So, like, I think that, there have been some clever things, but here's the thing: is there's also been clever hacks by other people that just haven't gotten the same coverage because they're clever in ways unlike Stuxnet. Like, Stuxnet was a very visible, high-profile thing because of what it was going after. But, like, I mean, in terms of, like, exciting operations, there's Fred Kaplan's Dark Territory mentioned this attack where the Russians were basically, they were supplying all of the USB keys to the kiosks that were operating around like the embassy and military bases in Kabul in Afghanistan, right? So like,
yep.
If you bought a USB key, it was like gently pre-owned by the KGB. Right. And like, it doesn't feel as big as Stuxnet. Like, it doesn't feel like it has the same sort of geopolitical gravitas, but I think it's innovative and clever. Or, it's definitely a very competent cyber operation that you would look at and say, yeah, like, they're good at what they do. Like, they figured out a way to do something and they executed on it.
I think this gets back to your, like, there's many different ways to be good, which wasn't the wording you used, but right at the beginning you said it's hard to say that anyone is the top.
Right.
Like, so it feels to me that in that example, the sort of Stuxnet equivalent would be to sell one USB key, but have it be a worm that secretly made its way across all of Afghanistan.
Right. Well, you sell one USB, but it's to SanDisk in Kingston. And it sort of gets the entire supply chain.
Whereas it's like the Russian story of the space pen, where
right.
I think it's apocryphal, not actually true, that the Americans spent millions of dollars coming up with a pen that would ride in zero gravity, and the Russians used a pencil. And the Russian approach is, well, we'll just give out these keys, and that's still like a lot of work because you to match the brands or whatever.
Right. Yeah, and you, I mean, the thing you can't have mistakes. For example, like they did with the XZ backdoor. Right. Like, you can't screw it up, because once it's on a USB and it's out there, the first guy that plugs it in and it crashes his computer, the entire operation is blown and you lose everything. Right. So, I think that there's like elements to it that are that require absolutely decent quality, good, competent work. So, like, these elements that require like competence and stuff, you do see when you talk to the Americans, they do talk about China and Russia as near peers in cyber. Like, they acknowledge that these are very competent. I would say that the US is also a near peer.
Right.
It might be a first among equals as far as they're concerned, but
right. Right.
Like,
right.
If our metric is based on how many cyber exchanges have you hacked, like how much Bitcoin have you stolen,
how many crypto exchanges? Yeah.
Yeah, right. If we're looking at that sort of metric, then obviously, the North Koreans are far and ahead the best. So, like Lazarus is very, very good at what they do, but what they do is one tiny thing.
But I mean, the types of attacks they use, like the techniques you could use anywhere, right? It's just that they have this particular interest.
Right, and it's visible. I think this is what I bring up is I think that the same forces that apply to SIGINT and offensive cyber that we were talking about, this immediate positive feedback, is the same thing with hacking a crypto exchange or stealing Bitcoin or whatever. Like, you have the Bitcoin or you don't.
Yeah.
Right. It's very binary. Like, that did work or did not work. You can't be a little bit stolen Bitcoin. And so the other thing is it's very publicly visible when it happens. So if you think like what they were stealing was intelligence collection that was then being processed and turned into intelligence product, that's what you would see if you were on the inside of a SIGINT agency doing cyber stuff. Only instead of Bitcoin, it would be emails or spreadsheets or whatever it is, call logs and things like that.
Yep.
So I think that Lazarus in a way is a good proxy to show like this is what a SIGINT agency looks like when it's operating, even if it's a very small one.
Yep.
Right.
Because of I think the General Reconnaissance Bureau, I thought last time I read it was 5,000 or 6,000 people. So not that small, I don't think.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So it's not tiny.
Small compared to NSA.
Right. That's sort of what I was getting at. It's like maybe it's more average size. Right. It's more. It's a normal size for a country to have 5,000 people on cyber as opposed to 30 or 36 or 40 or 50 or whatever it is.
Right. I also think it's interesting they don't have that decades long history. Maybe it is decades long now, but it's not 50 years long.
And when they started out, they were awful, right? They were an embarrassment. Everyone was making jokes about them, reusing PHP scripts from other people, doing these very, very basic, embarrassing, lame hacks. And 15 years later, who's laughing now?
Yeah.
It's very much a glow up. And to me, what that speaks to is that there's a lot of this mythology about there's we can't get the people, or there's not enough bugs. Like, there's just this perception of scarcity around cyber. Mm-hmm. It's like, look, if a country without internet access can be a top tier player in less than 20 years, literally anyone can do it, right? Like, there's no scarcity. There's a lack of political will, and that's it. That's my thesis, and I'm sticking to it.
So, in fact, what you're saying is that the reason NSA is better than anyone else is because the US just cares more. Yeah, than anyone else.
Like, they're more caring. They wanted it more. That's it.
I mean, I think that just militarily, you've got quite a lot of countries who agree that the US is the most powerful, and
which is why they've got such a great record of victory the last 80 years.
Look
what they did to Grenada. That was a unquestionable,
but I guess I was getting at that there's a lot of public figures, like metrics that are publicly available, that reinforce that, right?
Right.
And there's less in the cyber domain, but you do have, I guess, countries like Australia, UK, US, Canada, who would go, okay, yes, the US is better than we are. They would not say we're better than the NSA.
Yeah, but I think
that would be ludicrous.
You're right, but I think at the same time you wouldn't find them saying because we are less competent at what we do. Right?
Yeah.
That's not what they're saying. It's just because we have fewer people. It's, like pound for pound, we're their equal, but they're an 800-pound gorilla.
That's right.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thanks, Grugq.